We have no extraordinary items and we have no notices of motion, but we do have a mayoral report, and it's the Mayor's first mayoral report, so welcome Mayor Goff. And we have it up there, and I have seconded your report, so it's been moved by yourself and seconded by me.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and to councillors, to officials, to members of the public and the media that are here today. I may take a little longer than the usual 10 minutes with your indulgence, Mr Chair, as this is the mayoral proposal that we are going to put forward for consultation. I'd like to first of all point out, particularly for those of the councillors that are freshly elected, or newly elected I should say, on this body, what happens from here on in, and I think the public needs to understand it as well. We have initial deliberations on this consultation document today. In a fortnight, this same committee will make recommendations on the consultation items. That will then go to the last governing body for this year, which is on the 15th of December. And we don't actually adopt the document until the 9th of February. At that point, it will go out for a couple of months of public consultation, and the governing body will confirm decisions on incorporating proposals in this document into the annual budget on the 1st of June, and we adopt the annual budget on the 19th of June. So this is the first step in quite a long process. It's a first step that has been put together in the barely 4 weeks since inauguration, alongside many of the other tasks of my office and of council. But it is an important document, and it sets out where we see the priorities for the coming year and its expenditure will be. Can I indicate that that will need to be further developed when we commence deliberations on the long-term plan for 2018-2028, which will be the primary vehicle for making significant budgetary changes over the triennium. Yesterday in this room to the Planning Committee, I set out a pretty simple and basic analysis of the key challenges facing us and facing our city. And it goes along these lines. We are, as a city, facing record and unprecedented growth. Last year we grew by 42,600 additional Aucklanders, and we're estimated in the next 3 decades to grow by a further 1 million. So, growth. The second aspect of it is that housing and transport infrastructure has lagged behind that growth and is continuing to lag behind that growth. And that means that we are facing, firstly, worsening congestion on our roads, which is, I think, a primary concern to Aucklanders. It's a primary concern to the country. It costs us $3 billion a year, but it costs Aucklanders quality of life, and it causes incredible frustration, and we need to start to make headway on that instead of falling further behind with the congestion and the gridlock getting worse. Secondly, the failure to invest in housing infrastructure means that we simply aren't building enough houses for the growth in our population. That means that we have a very fast level of inflation that is pushing housing costs beyond the means of a whole lot of Auckland families ever to be able to buy their own home, and causing incredible pressure, particularly on our lower income people in the city, because rents have risen so fast that probably the 20% of our lowest income earners may be paying as much as 60% of their household income in rent. That is unaffordable, that is damaging them, and the people at the very bottom of the heap are falling out of the housing market altogether, and that is leading to increasing homelessness. I should also add that the increase in population puts pressure on our environment, and I'm not focusing on that today, but it is going to be a focal point for the council over the coming triennium. More people utilising our resources, more pressure on public open space, on beaches, on shellfish and fish stocks, and so on. So what I want to do today is set out a series of proposals designed to manage our fiscal risk while finding efficiencies and also looking for new revenue streams to ease the burden on the ratepayers. And the themes that I'm pursuing are firstly fairness, and it's fairness in sharing the burden across all of those who benefit from living and doing business in this city, rather than leaving the burden overwhelmingly on the ratepayer. The second theme is stability, in ensuring that our rate rises are reasonable. In the previous year, with the interim transport levy, the average rate increase was close to 10%. What I am proposing for this year is a quarter of that amount and less than what is set out in the long-term plan, 2.5% rather than 3.5%. And we need to ensure also that we maintain the fiscal obligations on us and act with care in ensuring that we maintain our fiscal rating so that the increase of borrowing that we need for infrastructure does not increase by tens of millions of dollars. The third theme is collaboration. When we tackle these problems, we aren't and cannot do that on our own. We need a partnership with central government. That is absolutely vital, because most of the revenue sources raised in the city go to central, not local government. We need to partner with businesses, we need to partner with the community to find the solutions to making this one of the best performing cities in the world. So the budget starts with the commitment to maintain rate increases at 2.5%. That was the pledge that I made to Aucklanders at every meeting that I did across the city, and that is the pledge that I intend to honour. Secondly, in order to maintain the average rate rise at 2.5%, that has implications for the uniform annual general charge and the reduction in the differential between businesses and residences and farms. If I look at the uniform annual general charge, my intention is to maintain that at exactly the proportion that it is at the moment, neither increase it as a proportion nor decrease it. So it would rise at the same level as the general level of rates. I know there'll be some debate around this, and I've looked at what other cities are paying in uniform annual general charges. And those, we are, for the bigger cities, at the higher end of what we set out in the uniform annual general charge. Just looking through some papers, I had a document here. For Wellington, Christchurch and Hamilton, Wellington and Christchurch I think is at 0. From memory, Hamilton is at 7%, Dunedin at 16%. Ironically, the smaller provincial towns are at much higher percents, 20% plus, including in some of our poorer cities. So what I am proposing is that we maintain it at the current proportion of the rates. Secondly, if we're in the process of reducing the business rates in proportion to the overall rate take from 32.7% down to 25.8% in equal steps, I think, through to 2036, if I remember rightly. If we maintain that this year, that would result in a rates increase of about 3% for residents and I think 1.6% for businesses. I am proposing that we pause for 1 year in the reduction of that differential so that the average increase across residences and businesses would be kept to 2.5%. I'm doing that mindful of the fact that the interim transport levy, which expires in 2018, heavily advantages businesses as opposed to residences. I don't intend to change the interim transport levy because I intend that we should eliminate it in 2018, but that of course is dependent on there being an alternative, not only an alternative, actually a better way of funding our transport system. We need to raise under the alignment project between central and local government another $400 million a year shared between those two bodies. The interim transport levy raises $60 million. It is a quarter of what we are likely to need. It will therefore be inadequate. It's not a case of maintaining the interim transport levy. If we were to keep that burden on rates, we would have to increase that burden fourfold just to meet the minimum requirements of the Auckland Transport Alignment Project. So we have to look at alternatives. I want to emphasise the constraint that is on us. You know the constraint that is on us in terms of rates. Aucklanders have sent the same message to all of us. They do not expect to continue to face close to double-digit rates, and they have been promised an average rate increase of 2.5%. Normally, when you're talking about growing infrastructure, you would talk about borrowing to pay for that. And you borrow to pay for it because it is not operational spending, it is capital investment, and it's long-term capital investment. There is, however, a critical constraint on us in increasing our debt, and that is to maintain our AA credit rating that we have with Standard & Poor's. We have to keep our debt to revenue ratio at below 265%. In the coming financial year, it will reach, I understand, around 256%. There is not much freeway between the maximum that we can have that ratio at and where we will be during the coming financial year. If we want to raise more capital for vital investment, necessary investment in infrastructure, we therefore have to increase our revenue even more than actually maintaining a tight cap on our spending. We have to do both, of course. If we go above that 265%, that will be reflected in a potential credit downgrade. It will restrict our access to long-term durable credit, and it will cost us tens of millions of dollars. I think we have to maintain that credit rating and we have to keep within that ratio. So I'm promoting a range of initiatives here today that do not involve putting more burden on the ratepayer and do not involve us breaching that credit rating or that proportion of debt to revenue ratio. And I want to now outline those quickly. The first is a now much debated visitor levy, and I was interested in the headline in the Herald Business section today, which talked about this being commonplace across the world. Of course it is. You go to Rome, Berlin, Paris, New York, Chicago, you'll be paying this not at the level that I'm proposing, but actually quite frequently at a much, much higher level. It's not unusual, and what it does is that it's designed to share the burden of the cost of tourism. Tourism is, of course, a benefit and an advantage, but it's also a cost in terms of the pressure on our infrastructure. What I'm proposing is a 3 to 4% surcharge on a typical nightly tariff. If you're staying in a 4 or 5 star hotel, that might be the equivalent of $6 to $10 a night. That is relatively small in respect to the overall cost of the room, but relatively small also in terms of the overall expenditure, even in getting to New Zealand. That money would therefore replace the ratepayer funding that promotes marketing and tourism that goes to ATEED, and would free up that ratepayer funding, $20 to $30 million, to enable us to leverage to raise more capital to meet the infrastructure demands caused by growing tourism and growing population. For example, if the levy brought in $30 million, that would enable us to raise a further $100 million plus in capital for investment in infrastructure, while keeping well within the limitations on our debt to revenue ratio.